even though all of the books were in Japanese and Chinese characters, as there were no Korean books available because Japanese colonial government had forbidden learning Korean. I read Kant and Schopenhauer's The World as a Will and Representation. Of course, I did not understand much of the contents in view of the Chinese characters and words such as metaphysics. But I could not help my fascination and interest from the few parts I understood. I excelled in school, even receiving a special award from the Education Minister, Park Kun-young. I was selected to enter the Pyongyang Normal School as one of the 160 gifted students. My goal since age 11 was to become a doctor, discover a cure for cancer, and find a solution for world peace. I was certain that I would achieve these goals. I had a loving home, family, the best teachers, and their encouragement. I was so sure of my bright future that I was unshaken, undeterred, even as the machine gun bullets sprayed into my room, barely missing me on the fourth week of July 1950. On June 29, I was in the city of Sariwon, located about 75 miles south from Pyongyang. I was 16 and expecting my mother to arrive for my graduation from Sariwon Middle School. But she was unable to attend because the train stations had been bombed. As many people started walking on foot to their own destinations, the road was full of people walking with bundles on their backs and heads. I too was packing a bag to take home with me when suddenly, with a terrible noise, bullets ripped through the mud wall of the Korean traditional house where I was, and smoke rose from the floor, the bullets barely missing me. I picked up the cartridges, still warm on the floor, wrapped and packed them with the rest of my belongings. I still remember the machine gun bullets were made in 1942 in Japan, according to the writings on them. I left Sariwon for my home in Pyongyang, walking on foot for 3 nights and 4 days, sleeping with other travelers in an empty farmhouse or in the woods. We worked, sometimes in rain, and dried when the sun came out. I stopped at the roadside stream to tidy myself, washing my hands and face. When I came face to face with Kim, a student at Kim Il-sung University, working in the opposite direction to his home in Haeju, Ganghae-do. In past, Kim took the same train as I during the weekends visiting home. On the train, sitting in the same seats across from me, smiling, we used to exchange light conversation about schools. After spending the night in farmhouse, another night in the woods, I was wet and drying. In the sun, my hair disarray. I was very embarrassed at being seen in the state that I was. 19-year-old Kim, too, looked disabled and in need of shaving. For a moment, wordless, we just stared at each other, but we knew we must get on the road and hurry homeward. Kim went south to Haeju, and I went north to Pyongyang. Kim, holding his college blazer on his shoulder, stared at me for a long time and said, After the war, and 25 o'clock, let us meet here, pointing at the ground between a tree and the stream where both of us were standing. I in my school uniform, Kim in his college uniform. We departed, each going in our direction, merging into the crowd. I picked some apples from roadside orchard, started to eat, when an old lady from nearby farmhouse came and offered me a boiled egg. It was timely, as I hadn't eaten since I left. After a day and a half of more working, I saw at a distance a familiar horizon, which told me I am getting closer to home. I decided to tidy myself and stopped by a stream again. I washed, changed my blouse, and combed my hair to make myself presentable to my father and mother, to reduce their shock at seeing my state. My face was so dark with sunburn, I could not even recognize myself when I glimpsed my face in my small pocket mirror. Finally, arriving home, upon entering the familiar gate, I bowed and said, "Father and Mother, I have returned." Here I bought some apples and souvenir. My father, who was ill with cancer and laying on the wooden porch, raised himself up, surprised, and said with a rare smile, "So you found your way home?" While home, I volunteered in a local temporary clinic in neighborhood. Neighbors injured by bomb fragments came to a home for care. All I had was alcohol and mercurochrome to wash their wounds. Within 3 weeks of my return, my father passed away at Kangso, where he went to rest. I helped at home with chores, but with increased bombing, people were leaving the city of Pyongyang. My oldest sister took my younger siblings with a 1.5-year-old baby to a Buddhist temple in the mountain for refuge. Mr. Kim, a friend of our neighbor, had stayed at our house overnight with 3 other people. They had come looking for families. Mr. Kim told my mother the next day he would help me and send me to school and return when the war is over. Thinking I might be safer from the bombing, my mother allowed me to come to South Korea with Mr. Kim. Her last words to me were, "Seoul is cold, keep warm, stay alive, and do right." On December 3, 1950, I came to Seoul. Within 3 months, Mr. Kim died. I didn't realize until I came to South Korea that I had lost everything. I was now a refugee and an orphan. I hadn't even graduated from high school and had no skill to earn a living. I had no shelter or food to sustain my life. And so I decided to enter back military nursing school in Busan. The impact of war was like a bomb that destroyed all I had hoped for. All of my life plans. I loved my family, my fatherland, and the world. I wanted to make a positive difference during this brief lifetime on earth. Even then, I knew life was precious. I had no time to waste. In 1956, while I attending Busan University and working at the same time through the invitation and insistence of a Methodist minister from Texas, I came to the US to continue my studies. Never a day went by without thinking of my family. I wrote letters to the Red Cross, embassies in China, Poland, Soviet Union, asking for my help, to find my family. I wrote letters to my mother in Pyongyang when I was attending American University in Washington, but they returned. In 1988, after many years of my searching and waiting, out of the blue, I finally received a letter from DPRK, North Korea, from the Office of the Assistance for Korean Phenomena Abroad, saying that they had located my family and I may visit them at any time at my convenience. I couldn't believe it, not shocked. It wasn't even raining, but I put on my raincoat, went out for a walk in my neighborhood for blocks to digest the news. In May of 1988, I made my first visit back to Pyongyang to see my family after 38 years. I learned from my oldest sister that my mother had died within a month of my leaving, waiting each day for my return. I have made many visits to see my family until the new sanctions were imposed. My last visit to North Korea to see my family was in 2016. I have not heard from my family for 7 years. I fear I have lost my family again. With continued increasing sanctions, the trauma of this unending war continues. In spite of having lived and survived and succeeded in starting a new life and family in America, the stigma of being from North Korea provokes suspicion. I cope with these biases daily, compounding the personal trauma of war that is ever present with me. War destroys not only houses, buildings, railroad stations, and communities. War destroys hope and aspirations of the individual and all, replacing them with the horrors of war that after more than 70 years, time and memory amplify, not erase. Its legacy extends to my children and my grandchildren. I am close to 90. My time is limited. I have given my best to my adopted country, America, for 62 years as a citizen, a teacher, a nurse, business owner, a humanitarian, and taxpayer. But I have given so little to my own family, the source of my being here today. I cannot visit my own flesh and blood. I cannot visit the graves of my parents. I cannot even send a letter due to the sanction. As one of the oldest separated Korean American families, I ask my government to remove the sanctions, allowing separated families to reunite and end this ongoing war once and for all. Thank you.
testimony with us. It's an important reminder of how the trauma of the war continues with us. And I'm grateful now to introduce a colleague, Dr. Kee Park, who's the director of Korea Health Policy at Harvard Medical School. Since 2007, Dr. Park has visited the DPRK over 20 times, supporting medical cooperation with physicians and hospitals in the DPRK, and we're excited to listen to his story today.
Thanks, Jennifer. Can you all hear me? Okay. No. Oh, can you hear me now? Okay. I just wanted to first say thanks to the Women DMZ, Christine Hahn, and also the Linda for hosting. Sorry. I'm just a bit stirred inside. I don't know if you are as well, from listening to Joy and Rick. Rick, I hope you find your dad's remains. And Joy, you get a reward from me for world peace. I want to go back to the theme, human cost of unended war, and try to unpack that a little bit. And just, I'm not a historian, but I work in the Department of Global Health and Social Medicine, and we look at social factors that impact health. If you look at warfare, history of warfare, a long time ago, Civil War, those fights, those battles actually happened in battlefields, right? And the soldiers got together, fought each other, and whoever won that battle. And civilians, by and large, were left out of casualties. That has changed significantly in the modern era. Today, over 90% of casualties from conflict is civilian. And that is because weapons have become increasingly sophisticated, right? We have weapons of mass destruction. We now, in battle plans and wars, routinely, literally destroy cities. And that has a lot to do with, I think, the way the North Koreans are thinking about how to defend themselves today. But I want to talk about a little bit on the human cost of war. Not only is there direct casualties, but there are actually secondary effects of war. Loss of medical systems, poverty, food shortages. But then there's other things like rise in sexual violence, and then trauma and mental health. I can tell you, one thing you can take away today is the intergenerational impact of war. Rick still has impact of it. I do too. My dad and mom are refugees. Went down to Busan, and to this day, they save everything. In Korean we say "ekyo." We're not poor, but they can't throw anything away because you just never know. And my mom especially, she has 5 refrigerators. Actually, I hope my mom's not watching. And you know what? I used to, but I no longer try to tell her we don't need all that food. But for her, it's a sense of security because she was insecure at one point. And so now we're dealing with intergenerational impact of war. And this is a human cost that we don't appreciate. Now, I'm really glad we're framing this as a human cost of unended war. It's not a lack of peace. War has not ended. When war breaks out, typically governments put martial law in place. You all know what martial law is, right? It's a replacement of civilian government with military government. And in that system, we give up fundamental civil rights, right, in the name of national security. Well, guess what? North Korea is still consider themselves as in war. And I think that really explains some of their, not all of it, but some of their motivation behind a highly securitized government and society. And you have to wonder, right, if we end the war, maybe some of that justification will go away, right? And maybe some of those liberties can be restored. But it also, the fact that there's no end of war creates a motivation for military readiness. And we'll talk about it later on this afternoon with Anne. But I want to talk a little bit because North Korea that's military first, defense first. They have a 1.3 million active duty military. Per capita, so the population of North Korea is about 25 million. That is highest in anywhere in the world, per capita. And then, of course, in terms of cost of maintaining an active military like of that size is massive. 25% is some estimates in the national budget. One in every, or $4 or for whatever North Korea uses goes to military. Now, that also motivates them to develop nuclear weapons. I think Professor Cummings really beautifully laid out the threat, the terror that they were living under. And they want to try to be, in order to defend themselves, they really felt that they had to develop nuclear weapons. Now, while they're maintaining military readiness, I will tell you our research team has analyzed their spending on health over the last 15 to 20 years. And to our estimates, they're spending between 6 to 7% of their GDP on health. And that has been sustained throughout the entire nuclear program and the ICBM program. For North Korea, the maintenance of health of their population is one of their top priorities. On top of that, they've of course maintained free education and free health care. I do have some data. We looked at the import of insulin from China. All right? Insulin is a medication we use for diabetes. It actually has to be stored in refrigerators and it's perishable, so it doesn't last forever. And over the last couple of years, they have increased the import of insulin by tenfold. And you can see this on Chinese import-export data. Our analysis shows that that amount of insulin is sufficient to treat about 70% of North Korea's diabetic patients. So when you hear some people say North Korea doesn't care about their people, or they have abandoned the welfare of their people for prioritizing military, it simply is not true. North Korea's elite is 10% of their population? So they're buying insulin to treat. And these are chronic diseases. These are not just drugs you give out. You have to maintain them for up to almost 70% of their population. Now let's talk a little bit about the ongoing, the fact that there's an unended war, and we have there are coercive measures, right? Hostile policies. So in the absence of actual bullets going across, there are other things that countries that are at war do. And these are, someone mentioned sanctions. And then Professor Cummings is right. North Korea is subjected to the harshest sanctions regime in history. Think about sanctions as warfare without bullets. Think about, and so what's happened in North Korea, the sanctions have been gradually ramped up from bullets to small bombs, to artillery, to missiles. And then they've been upped in the last 6 or 7 years to now what we call sectoral sanctions. That's the nuclear bomb of sanctions. Why is that? Because it involves civilian economy. It is indiscriminate in military versus civilian targets. So these sectoral sanctions are designed to block all of North Korea's exports, garments, minerals, and seafood. And it limited import of petroleum products to 10% over the previous years. It's a complete economic blockade. And these sanctions disingenuously say that these are not intended to harm ordinary people of North Korea. It is simply disingenuous and just an outright lie. Same way the nuclear weapon cannot distinguish between civilians and military targets, the sectoral sanctions are going to have intended impact on the civilian of North Korea. A few years ago, Korea Peace Now, Christine Han, assembled a number of experts to come up with a report, Human Cost of Sanctions on North Korea. It was a gendered, especially for looking at the women aspects of it. But one of our contributions was that we looked at the impact of sanctions on the UN agency's ability to deliver humanitarian programming inside North Korea. Things like emergency maternal kits that are used in case of a complication that occurs during childbirth. These are known to reduce maternal mortality. Those kits were delayed or undelivered in part. And then the ability to treat severe acute malnutrition in children under 5, which has a high mortality rate. And UNICEF was not able to fulfill all of its programming due to delays and funding cuts due to sanctions. So we estimated this is a rock bottom number, very conservative estimate of almost 4,000 North Koreans may have died as a result of these sanctions. Sanctions kill. We know it, and we should not accept that. On top of these sanctions, we have actually gone beyond and applied pressure tactics and actively prevented certain kinds of humanitarian actions. So one example is the Global Fund. They provided, for over the last 10 years, 100,000 drugs for tuberculosis for 100,000 North Koreans. They do that for most of the countries with high burden TB. In 2018, they stopped that program, and it's come out, and that US and Japan were the ones that forced Global Fund to stop it. They have resumed their programming, but you can see what's happening. There's currently no banking channel for NGOs or even international organizations to pay for their expenses in Pyongyang. And Jennifer's group she could maybe talk more about that. Now, US actually has unilateral sanctions and US Treasury regulations. And I won't name who, but a US faith-based NGO, long history of working in North Korea, was actually investigated, and they had to get lawyers. So you see where things are going. We have allowed our leaders and our examples of our morals to deteriorate, and we have become barbarians because we accept death of children and women as acceptable in name of national and regional insecurity. Now, I'm a medical doctor. I don't know if you know that. And I take an oath of ethics when I graduated from medical school before getting into actual practice. It says, it's a Hippocratic oath, and there's a part called primum non nocere. It means first do no harm. Because we're given skills and medicines and other treatments that can actually harm people. We have that oath, and we try to not harm anyone. Why isn't there a similar oath for people who use weapons, who are capable of delivering sanctions, who are deadly? The benefits of ending the war is clear. For a health practitioner like myself, peace is a prerequisite for health. It's the most important thing we can do before even providing medical care. We have a solution. Peace is attainable, and we can and should make it happen. And what I'm seeing over the last 15 years is the increasing effectiveness and influence by Korean Americans. And I'm going to speak specifically to Gyopos, okay? We have a role to play, and we've been doing an amazing job. We need to do more, and we need to act as the bridge, right, between our community to the general American public. They need to understand what we're doing is immoral. Now, some may say that it's hard to take on the military-industrial complex. Absolutely, absolutely. We're small fry compared to what they're capable of. But you know what? I'm going to finish with a quote from Martin Luther King. He said, "We shall overcome because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." Thank you.
Thank you, Key, for that inspiring ending to the panelist remarks. And I just should say that, yes, the OFAC investigation was American Foreign Service Committee. And just to use my moderator's privilege, I'll say that I work with the American Friends Service Committee, and we also deliver humanitarian programming in DPRK, working with partners since 1980. And at Key, I just could not agree more with just about everything you said, especially around sanctions. So I think we have about 10 minutes left, trying to keep to our schedule, and we'll take some questions, maybe 2 or 3.
Hi, my name is Paul Lee from Divided Families USA. I think all three of you, Joy, Rick, Key, you mentioned the intergenerational effect of the Korean War. And yesterday afternoon, many of us participated in this communal grief event, circle on Han. And the person leading the circle was talking about how oftentimes our children, we don't know how to cry. We are not taught how to cry or taught why we cry. So I guess my question is, how to educate the next generation who have not had these lived experiences or relationships with these family members or people in North Korea. And AFSC is supporting a project that my organization is doing, an oral history of video messages from Korean American divided families, including Joy, the family members in North Korea. And the goal is to try to educate the next generation and other Americans. So I guess my question is, what advice would you have of teaching the next generation about how to deal with this Han and how to process this Han and grief?
Maybe, if you would like it to be.
Do you want to?
No.
Well, I'll address that, Paul, in the sense that, I cry so easily, but I have the wound. So how do you get people who don't have the wound to feel the emotion? And I might, off the top of my head, say that they have to look to the people who were hurt the most, who they loved, and try to bring that into their own life. But I don't know if you can do that. You cannot replicate the pain and the void that is there that causes us to cry. So and if that's where you were going, to extend the emotion, because that is a concern. Because how does that? If that fades, then does the caring phase? So how do we perpetuate that attachment to it, that emotional attachment? It's a very good question, and I don't know. The doctor may have a biological approach that works, anatomical. I don't know.
So in lead up to today, I was contacted by two 30 under 30. Is Iris here?
She's
Iris?
working on an article right now.
Oh.
She's hard at work.
So I get an email and say, hey, I want to do an article about this panel. And maybe she reached out to you as well. And she's has connections to NBC, I think, and so it was actually published. And she's this young Korean American, right? And she took it upon herself to make this issue personal. Then I got contacted by another gentleman named Kale, and Kale's here. And Kale's, I found out, is not even Korean. And this is, I'm so hopeful because the next generation of leaders who I think see the value of what we're doing, and it's what we're dealing with is universal values of family, love, peace. This transcends cultures and language and countries, and I'm just really hopeful that the next generation can really make a difference, tell the stories, help tell the stories. But they're getting a lot more sophisticated than I think we were when we were their age, for sure. I wasn't even thinking about writing these beautiful pieces. But thank you for the younger generation for doing that.
I'd like to add, yes, a big applause, because I wonder if your question, Paul, is necessary. look at what's happening without that emotional attachment. If I'm still on your track, you know, it's wonderful to see this go on, and maybe it's not necessary that they cry, that you cry, because there's something driving it, as you can see around this room and all the people that are working on this, that is just impressive without that emotional attachment.
So, for me, it's more like a comment more than a question. And I thank you for evoking 선생님. And I'm also a divided member. And 2 times I cry really when I speak. It's about the divided family and LGBTQ issue. So because it's all personal to me, so I think it's really important that people with a personal, you know, I guess personal feeling go up, like speak to younger generation, inspire them, and then they can, you know, work on behalf of us, and we support them. And also, I just want to have a short, tell you the short experience of my grandmother. My grandmother is opposite. So my grandmother came here when she was 65 from South Korea because she knew she couldn't meet her older son in North Korea. And she came and she worked in the factory. And through my father also did, finding the divided family members. So he found my uncle. And at the age of like 70, she was lucky enough to go and see her own son. And after 37 years. And it was, so for me, it's, you know, the opposite story of 복신 선생님, right? And I saw that it's just, you know, amazing. And then that was possible then, right? Now people cannot do that. You know, people like my grandmother cannot go. So we just like ask, I guess, everybody, you know, to lift a ban, travel ban, so we can meet the family members. I can meet my cousins. And really thank you for doing this.
Thank you, and I see that we are out of time. Do we have time for more? Okay, one more question. Maybe, I see 3 hands up. Maybe you, Kale? Okay, yeah.
Maybe it's a comment more than a question. It's responding to the first question is, those generations who have not had a direct trauma, how can we cry? And what I'm discovering as I get older is that actually there's a transgenerational trauma, that collective trauma moves from one generation to the other, and I'm beginning to discover that is my pain. There are certain human situations where I have no reason why I'm so sad, so depressed, and so angry, so uncontrollable tears and all those things. I mean, when you grew up with parents who were war refugees, my father grew up in North Korea, but by the time it was divided, they already all moved to South Korea. But rarely talked about their war experiences. It took a long time for them to even open up. And when you grow up with family setting like that, it affects you. But that's not my own story. I discovered that story of every Koreans and Korean Americans of my generation. And there are other traumas that are, God, there's one specific thing I was going to talk, but I forgot. I guess I'm getting old. Didn't sleep much for this conference. Just want to say that there are pains that are transferred, and we have to address those things as well. In other words, not being able to fully thrive as, one example is when they find out that I'm Korean American, they was from South or North. I said, I'm not South Korean American or North Korean American, I'm Korean American. And to deal with that, continuously fighting for my identity, it's it's very painful, right? And I guess people feel that. Just let's recognize the collective trauma that Koreans experienced, and Americans and 19 other nations that sent soldiers to Korean War on both sides, right? And the trauma that's continuing. That's literally all over the world, reflected continuously in global foreign policies and continuous war. It's a human, entire global trauma, and we're localizing into Korean-American conflict. We have to do this to heal together.
I think we're going to end now, but just to say, as I said at the start, we could spend all day talking about the impacts of the unended war, and I know that there's conversations happening after this and in our communities and in our families, and I hope that we can continue the healing process and end the war.
Yeah. Please join me in thanking I'd like to welcome you all to take some lunch. We will have, for those of you online, we will have a break now and reconvene what time? At 1 o'clock. So please come back, enjoy your lunches, and spend lots of time with each other discussing what you've learned. Thank you.